Hello and welcome back to the Finally Quit Porn podcast. Today I'm joined by Mary Paulus once again to talk about porn addiction recovery. Welcome back, Mary. How are you doing today?
Doing pretty good today. How are you, Tom?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the 3 month mark, so 90 days without pornography, what can happen to some people, and we're also going to talk through some of my old junky thinking. So hopefully this can help our audience understand what thoughts to look out for and how the addicted part of the mind will create any rationalization, excuse, and justification to try and get you to engage in this compulsive behavior. So starting off with the 90 days, this was something that you wanted to bring up today, and I think it's really, really interesting because I resonate with it a lot. So people can struggle after the 90-day mark, and do you want to share why this is? And I think it also applies to maybe like the 2 month, 3 month mark, kind of when you're starting to gain a lot more confidence in your approach and thinking that you're quitting. There can be the complacency that creeps in, but then on the other side to that, there's also these feelings of, I'm still struggling with this. So, Mary, do you want to expand on that?
Well, I think that there's, two aspects of it. If you use this methodology and you're actually changing your pathways, and being able to remember what it's like to be stuck in the addiction, it's just kind of critical, even when you've changed the pathways, to kind of refresh on what it's been like, and our clients create a remember letter for that purpose. And because at that 3 month mark, 2.5 to 3 months is the highest relapse time for all addictions. The brain starts to really forget that reality. And so if you've done this method, it's important to like really refresh on that. And it's fairly easy then to tap back into it. If you're feeling confident going along, it's like, okay, let's really consciously remember, make sure that we've got real estate in the brain that leads to, okay, this is what happens if I choose to engage and relapse, right? But then there's people out there in the world that are just trying to distract, or try not to think about, using avoidance methods, using substitution methods, or whatever they're doing to, try to avoid that desire. And then sometimes you can hold out for that amount of time, and I feel like there's like rehab and stuff that tends to be right around that amount of time as well. People go in for that extended period, but then when I think they come to the place where it's like, oh, well, I'm either going to be miserable with, being addicted and engaging with my addiction, or I'm going to be miserable trying not to do that, because they don't have any permanent change. They don't have any sense of freedom. And then it's like you can hold out for that amount of time. And I think that's why that relapse time is so common. It's like, okay, well, I can do all this, I can distract, I can think I'm, getting free of this thing, but then they still want to do it like all the time. And people just run out of energy, they get exhausted and then they relapse, so that's why it's so important to have that real permanent change in the brain, and then be able to just refresh and go, oh yeah, I remember, when I worked, when I originally started doing this work with nicotine addiction, we sent out a letter at 2.5 to 3 months for everybody who did the program, with a warning saying, come and do some follow-up, and just refresh and get into your remember letter and really remember what it was like, so it's a thing. And like, there's this thing that people prescribe, it's called Chantix for nicotine addiction. It kind of hits the same receptors in the brain. I've actually taught people to get off of Chantix that gets prescribed by their doctors. But it's really strange because the prescription is about that long, they're supposed to stop taking the Chantix right around 2.5 to 3 months. Well, I don't know. They've got no other way to deal with the addiction. What are they going to do, And I know
Yeah.
you have that experience with I don't know if you want to talk about that. the woman from your Samaritans group.
Yeah.
But that's a perfect example, you know.
Yeah, so last night I was at Samaritan, so I guess that's kind of what propelled us into this direction of talking about the 3 month mark. But yeah, I
Yeah.
had a woman last night, and I know I can't share too many details really, but yeah, 3 month mark with a certain addiction, and yeah, she phoned up because she was really quite ready to end her life, really, really quite ready, and she just had a relapse. So yeah, after 3 months, she's there, and she's there wanting to end her life. And we also had someone on this podcast not too long ago, probably about 4 or 5 months ago, and he had done, I think, 2.5 months. Some people will remember him on the podcast. And he was doing well, and I really loved that conversation with him. Great guy. And then again with him, he relapsed after about 2.5 months. And I'd been in contact with him, but he hadn't joined the program. And then he kept on relapsing and relapsing. The last time I heard from him was a couple of weeks ago, and he sent quite a worrying message. So I don't know what's going on with him, right now. I'd love to hear from him if he ever does listen to this, and if he can just reach out to say he's safe. But yeah, I think that 2.5, 3 month mark, if you have a bad, not even a bad relapse, if you just engage after that mark and then it kind of all comes back and you're like, geez, I'm back in this now,
Yeah.
because you forget about it. When you hit 2 or 3 months, you forget about how horrible it was. And so you can't even imagine feeling that way you used to feel. You can't imagine feeling tired, weak, exhausted, frustrated with yourself,
Yeah.
shamed, disconnected, alone, anxious, like you don't want to connect with anybody around you. You can't imagine feeling like that because for the last few weeks, you have been feeling a lot more confident, probably. You probably thought in your mind, okay, well, I've got to grips with this problem now. I'm doing good. And that was one thing that this woman said last night is she said a lot of people in her family sort of saw her as somebody else now. They kind of had they were really proud of her because she had overcome the addiction, or at least they thought she had, because she'd done these few months of sobriety. And then she was like so overwhelmed by the shame of having to tell people that she was in a really, really low place. And I think that's the other thing with the 2 or 3 month mark is that what you can get is even more sort of shame because the distance between where you were recently in your mind in terms of your level of confidence and how good you were feeling, and then suddenly being back in the addiction, it's like, whoa, it's like it's such a big contrast, such a big distance between those two states of mind that it can be even more overwhelming than, let's say, if you just did a few days and then went back
Yeah.
and engaged in the compulsive behavior. So my question to you, Mary, is let's say you are, 2 or 3 months into a program where you've been doing well, you've been quitting porn. How are you reinforcing the idea that this is really, really bad and it's not something you want to go back to?
Well, as I hear you talking about this, I feel like, I mean, I don't hear people out there in addictions that are feeling really good, except for the people that we work with. I mean, I don't want to act like, oh, it's just exclusive to us or whatever, but there can also be like that pink cloud, they call it, where you stop and you get kind of all this energy, but, you know, just trying not to think about it. That doesn't last, that doesn't last. And that's, I feel like people that are just hanging on, there's that limit to the misery feeling, thinking, well, junky thinking also that you're always going to feel this way. But when you don't really make permanent changes in your neural pathways, you kind of are going to always feel that way. And when people are substituting, the addiction hangs on, it hangs on, it hangs on, until you're just so frustrated and exhausted. And you really completely believe that this is the only option, that you're just going to feel like shit, trying not to be in your addiction. So you're going to give into it. You're going to, or if you are feeling good, you manage to feel good for a while, then you're going to tell yourself, oh, I'm doing so well, once won't hurt. Standard junkie thinking, doing so well once won't hurt. then you give in, and then it's like, oh my God, now I want to do it. I want to do it. See, this is always going to be this way. That junk, you give in, and then you have way more junky thinking. And it's and that's why, even though the guys in our program are saying, oh, or everyone says, I don't want to think about all that negative stuff. Well, thinking about that negative stuff intentionally is insurance to not have to return to it, because you get into a moment where you think, oh, well, once won't hurt. I'm doing so well. It's like, whoa, wait a second. I know what it means to give into this thing once. This is the reality. Here's the option. And I've got it all documented. Not only documented, but I've made it part of my neural pathways that says, I engage, this is my life, right? So yeah, does that answer the question? I don't know, I kind of went off into left field, but
Yeah, and another thing which I found really useful actually, and it's kind of funny because it came up in a conversation I had with a guy literally an hour ago. So we jumped on a one-on-one call because he wanted to learn more about this method, and that's something I'm going to start offering soon, I think. But yeah, he was going through the Beyond Compulsion Fundamentals program with me just now. So it's like a quick 1 hour call to really understand the
yeah.
basics of this method. And we have a slide in there, which is the drive behind the desire. And we talk about stress, boredom, depression, anxiety, feeling unfulfilled, challenging emotions, and a lack of socialization. And I was saying to him how most people think it's all of those things that lead to the desire, but actually the drive behind the desire is, of course, the one fact that is that you want to engage in this compulsive behavior because you're involved in an emotional psychological dependency with a mind, mood, or an experience. And he said, okay, so that stress, boredom, depression, anxiety, blah, blah, blah. He was like, well, is that being caused by the addiction? And I was like, yeah, that's what's causing the addiction. That's absolutely right. And we kind of got into that a little bit more. And I started to think, you know what? That's really interesting. That's such a good point because when you're like 2 or 3 months in and you're feeling some stress or boredom or anxiety, because you may be feeling quite confident, like you're doing well in terms of addiction recovery, you no longer associate those feelings with the addiction because you think maybe you've got a hold of this addiction now. But the reality is those feelings that are coming up and you're starting to analyze them like, oh, why do I feel so bored or frustrated or stressed out? And you're 2 or 3 months in and these feelings come up. You've now no longer connected those with the addiction, but we need to get that connection in your mind back in place. We need to go, okay, I'm really stressed. I'm at the 3 month mark. That's because I'm going through a withdrawal process. I'm going through addiction recovery right now. And I think it's very natural for me to feel even more stressed. And you will get to a position where you feel a lot less stressed or lonely and less anxious and all of those emotions. But what I've come to understand through working with you, Mary, is that a few months without porn, that I know this sounds, I don't want to disregard anyone's sort of progress as such in terms of recovery, but that to me isn't that big a deal. I used to think 3 months without porn was this massive thing, and you've quit now for life. 3 months is amazing, but I know firsthand from doing 3 months probably 3 or 4 times over the last like 3 years that yeah, you can be back in this right away. That doesn't really mean much, and I think it actually takes a little bit longer to rewire the addicted neural pathways. But I am curious on your thoughts on that.
Well, I feel like progress, people are so into measuring progress, especially the porn addiction guys with the streaks and everything. They're so into measuring progress, where for me, the real progress is that willingness to use your script in the critical moments of compulsive desire. That's where you're going to actually make physical changes in the brain and really make progress. But I feel like the guys just they really hang on to like some sense of freedom, like because they're not actually doing it, even though they're going to be down the road, they're going to have some stress or crisis or whatever, and then they're going to have the desire, don't know what to do with it, and then they engage, but they feel like they had that little bit of freedom from being on a streak or whatever. Whereas if you really make the changes and you understand that the stress, anxiety, all those things are normal, but you disconnect from, okay, I'm stressed out, I want to go look at porn. It's like, no, I'm stressed out because whatever reason, and maybe I'm going to do some kind of, stress management sort of technique, like deep breathing or whatever you want to do, but that's not all tied together. Like I want to do this because I'm stressed and depressed, and so then I got to go deal with all those kinds of things in order to stop this desire. When can stop the desire and then deal with your other normal, emotions that people have in a reasonable way, not
Yeah.
using it as a reason to engage in a behavior that's destroying your life.
Mm. But
Does
I
that make
think
sense?
but I think in those first like 2 or 3 months, a lot of those emotions are still going to be caused by the addiction. So it's like it's not just
Yeah.
okay, you're stressed and now you want the porn. It's actually I'm stressed because I'm in the addiction still and I'm going through withdrawal, and 2 or 3
Yeah.
months can lead to like the peak of withdrawal, right?
Well, withdrawal is uncomfortable. It feels stressful. Discomfort can feel like stress. Discomfort can feel like anxiety. I mean, it's like, yeah, you're trying to get your brain to go in a different direction then it's gone forever and ever, 10 years for most of our guys, whatever. It's like, that's uncomfortable. And discomfort and anxiety, I mean, that's not very far apart. But you don't have to go get treated for an anxiety disorder with addictive anxiety medication because it's part of the withdrawal process. It's like, and the thing is do we have to really even name the emotion? No, it's not even really necessary. It's just like, take the opportunity to go, okay, whatever the hell this feeling is, I still am in the, early stages of recovery from this porn addiction. I'm just going to go to my script. I'm going to think it through. I'm going to change the pathway, and every time you change a pathway, that's progress. If we take a guy that, let's say he's been off porn for 3 days and he's used his script 300 times, that's way the hell more progress than somebody's who are off for 3 months that is just, running around the block trying not to think about it,
Mm,
in my estimation.
mm.
Someone who's really willing to dive in and go, I'm going to use this tool because I want to get the hell out of this,
Yeah, yeah. Can you remember
that's
when I took the program, like those first few days? I was messaging you. I was like, okay,
yeah,
I've used these facts like literally 200 times today. Like I
yeah,
went
yeah,
all in.
yeah, yeah,
And
all
so,
in.
yeah, you
Yeah,
gotta like attack this though. Like you gotta be like, okay, my brain right now, I'm not happy with how this is. Those addicting neural pathways
yeah,
are literally causing me so much misery. I'm gonna do
yeah,
whatever I can to go all in, and I am gonna change my brain, and that is
yeah,
possible. And what I absolutely loved about this call I had about an hour ago, as I say, is that he was saying to me how much hope he felt from listening to this podcast because he'd been to SA
right,
before and he'd gone and kind of been taught this idea that you're going to be a porn addict for life. And I was saying to him, well, that fundamentally conflicts with the reality of neuroplasticity. Like it's literally science. Like your brain can change. Like I recommend everyone go read the book The
yeah,
Brain That Changed Itself. It's a really good book. Like I read it in January, but I think I'd already learned quite a lot of the neuroscience on this already. But anyway, point is, you literally can change your brain. You're not stuck in this
yeah,
addiction for life. And
yeah,
the way we described it together on this call is like, it's a bit like we've been, because it's the same for me. I've also been in this addiction for 10 years. So it's like for me, learning this method is a bit like you've been in a cave, really, really dark. And then when you begin to understand this method a little bit, it's kind of like you suddenly just found like a crack in this cave and you can see some lightness that you'd never seen before. And then this crack is like opening up more and more. And then eventually you start to peer out and then you end up just completely away from this darkness and away from the cave. And you've got this whole new world in front of you all around and it's just
yeah,
lightness. And it does take time and, it does take some discomfort. But if you're willing to accept that temporary discomfort of the addicted neural pathways, when you have that desire and you change the brain, then you will gain permanent, lasting freedom from this. But But yeah, it does take time, as we're saying.
Yeah, and neuroplasticity is so real, like you say, it's a science. I mean, they can like record it and like the change of the neural pathways in the brain. But with I mean, it's a wonderful revelation, but as far as I can tell, you can't just, oh, I'm just going to think different about this. It doesn't work like that because the addictive part of the mind is so invested in getting you to go down the old pathway. So you've got the addictive part of the mind going this way, this way, this way, this way. You're not going to create new neural pathways, you know? And that's where the script comes in, which is so specifically designed to be able to get you into the right pathway, get you out of the deprivation thinking, which is going to take you right back down the old path, regardless, all the junky thinking that we go over very specifically, reroute that, without that piece, with the script and all the junky thinking education, that addictive part of the mind is going to take you straight down that old pathway. You're not going to change anything,
Mm,
I
mm.
mean, you can try. I mean, and I just feel like all the distraction techniques or follow your dreams or whatever the hell else, fulfill your life. You're creating other neural pathways. Like, let's say, meditation, which I know is a great practice, right? So now you're going to meditate this thing away. So now you've created a pathway on how to meditate. Now you're a great meditator. Is that what you call them? Meditators? Yogi, whatever. You have this great practice that you do, but you still haven't connected to the pathway that is still connected from desire to look at porn to acting on it. And
Yeah.
that's where most people, they're not going to get into that pathway because there's just too much resistance there without the education on here's how I get connected to this pathway. Here's how I stay on this pathway when all the deprivation thinking and all the junky thinking comes into play.
Mm.
It's not just, oh, I'm just going to think different and I'm going to go on a Zen retreat and my neural pathways are going to change. No, they're not. So
Let me
yeah.
describe this in a metaphor, which I've literally just come up with now, but
Yay.
hopefully it will help. So, do you have asbestos in the States?
Asbestos?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So you don't want that in your home, do you?
No, it's like in the old buildings and they have to, get a permit and do all kinds of
Mm.
special stuff to be able to like remove it or whatever.
Yeah. Okay. So imagine I have asbestos in my flat right now. I've got a flat in Manchester, so I've got asbestos in my flat, let's just say, hypothetically. And I'm like, okay, so I've got this addictive neural pathway. That's the addictive neural pathway in the metaphor. And then I go, okay, well, I'm going to go and I'm just going to move to Portugal for 3 months because I don't have to deal with the asbestos. The holiday comes to an end after 3 months. Go back to my flat in Manchester. What change has been made? Well,
Nothing.
nothing. The asbestos is still there, right?
We
So
still have
that's what
asbestos.
we've got to tackle. It's like in your brain, there's these brain maps, and it's like they're located in certain areas. And so you can try and focus on going in a different direction, as you say, there's a different brain maps. There'll be a different brain map for like your meditation, and there'll be one for going to the gym, and there'll be one for socializing and your work and all of these things that you're probably doing really well at, but they're different brain maps in your mind. So that's like me going off to Portugal, then being in Sheffield, then London, and all these different cities in the UK. It's like, yeah, I can maybe stay at a friend's house or family in these different cities, but that's still not changing the asbestos in my flat. So
Right.
that's what we've got to tackle directly. And hopefully that can make sense to people because I know we talk a lot
Yeah.
about moving the triggers, but this is so essential. And then in terms of the junky thinking, that's like, that's just more asbestos basically growing, isn't it? Because I'll
Yeah.
talk you through some of my junky thinking because I do want to get onto that in this episode. So these are some from the last time I looked at porn that I've wrote down. So I've got I've already relapsed. So these are the junky thoughts I'd have before actually engaging in the compulsive behavior. So in my head, I'm like, okay, I've already relapsed. That'd be because maybe I've gone on Instagram, I've gone on the explore page, I've seen an attractive woman, and then I'm like, okay, I've already relapsed. So first of all, that first junky thought, how would you deal with that, Mary?
I've already relapsed.
Mm-hmm.
You mean just because you looked at social media or something?
Yeah, so in my mind, I would think that I've already
Yeah,
relapsed
right.
because I've seen something sexual. So it's kind of the spin, the state of
It's
helplessness. But
absolutely the
yeah.
spin, because now it's going to be about, which is a lot for podcast viewers because it's pretty in depth into the actual teaching in the program. But right there and then it's like, okay, now I've relapsed now, because what's going to happen for the guys that know, the program, it's like they're going to try to determine, or they're going to know it's useless to try to determine, did I relapse? Did I not relapse? Is looking at a little social media a relapse? Did I go to one page that was a little bit too? And that's what becomes the issue. Now, those neural pathways, those are just one big old circle in your head. Woo, 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 right? It's just like that's the crazy making stuff that happens with all addictions when you start analyzing and trying to answer these questions you can't answer, always ends in relapse. But of course, that's a really critical part of the program where we teach the guys how to avoid that useless questioning, because
Mhm.
the question that you want to answer is and use your script to answer, what do I want for myself in the long term, and what's the choice I'm going to make at this moment. It's not going to be whether or not I looked at something that was a little bit too much. That's like my food compulsives. Well, did I have one bite too many of the sandwich? Okay, what? But that's a question that gets them, and then it's like, oh my God, yes, I had one bite too many, so now I've relapsed and I'm this, it's just like the wrong direction, and you're going to reinforce some crazy neural pathways going there for sure,
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah,
yeah,
thanks for that. And another previous one of mine was the downsides won't be that bad. So again, this is after, 2 or 3 months, you're kind of feeling good, confident. You've totally forgotten at that point how you once felt the last time you engaged in the compulsive behavior. So the downsides won't be that bad. And you can almost dismiss any thoughts that are like, oh yeah, I'm going to feel tired, I'm going to feel weak, I'm going to feel anxious, I'm going to feel alone, I'm going to feel disconnected. Those
yeah,
words can almost feel meaningless when the
yeah.
addicted part of the mind feels like it's in control. So how do you deal with that?
Well, the thing is when you've used your script, I want to say religiously, diligently, proactively, that stuff's not going to disappear because it's going to become part of you. And when the new neural pathways are created, they're not going to keep trying to go the other way. It's just going to be like, oh yeah, I get this. Yep. I have a choice right now in this moment here. My brain wants to go to, thinking about porn or whatever. And so then it becomes totally automatic, and you don't think about that any more than you would think about sticking a knife in an electric socket. Your brain doesn't go, oh, I really want to do that, and I hope I can get away with it and not get electric. Brain doesn't go there. That's where neuroplasticity is so powerful and so great. But the thing is you got to do the work, but the work isn't going to be, oh, what do I do, how am I going to deal with this? It's like, oh, I got my script, I think it through. And it's like you do that like you'd pay your insurance premium. You're not going to like not pay your insurance premium, get canceled, and then you crash your car and you're going to be like, oh shit, well, I wish I wouldn't have crashed my car. It's like you're going to pay the consequences. You're going to lose your house, you're going to lose your bank account, whatever, to pay for this car crash because you didn't pay your insurance premium. Well, guess
Yeah,
what? You sit down every month to pay your damn insurance premium, because it's really important, the long-term consequences, and that's what the script does. Is it creates real estate in your brain that now if this is the choice I make, this is my life. If this is a choice I make, this is my life. And that becomes permanent.
You know, in
And the
terms
pull
of
goes away because the neuroplasticity, the pull goes away. So, yeah.
the consequences, another interesting one I used to have is basically along the lines of, you know, I'm not actually doing this right now, so there won't be the consequences. What I mean by that is like I would
Yeah.
be kind of engaging whilst tricking myself into believing I wasn't engaging. So, for example, yeah, scrolling on social media or going on any website really and just seeking some sexual content. But then there was some junky thinking going on that I'd be like, I'm not looking for porn or any sexual content right now. I'm just casually using TikTok or Twitter or Instagram, and so I can get away with looking at sexual content if it's by accident, if it's by the
Yeah.
algorithm, and not have to pay any consequences here because I'm
Yeah.
not actively seeking it. I'm not choosing to look at porn. It's just the algorithm. That was some other junky thinking I used to have very, very frequently.
Yeah. And how'd that work for you?
Well, I'd always end up actually looking at sexual
Yeah.
content.
Right.
I'd always
Yeah.
end up feeling absolutely terrible. So it
Yeah.
didn't work out well at all.
Yeah. Nice to have an education where you don't have to bullshit yourself, right?
Yeah.
And just like into, yeah. Oh, it's just, I'm not really doing anything. It's just like, who are you kidding, And just that trying to kid yourself becomes that unanswerable questioning loop too, question loop. So it's completely useless. But you know, with knowing the addictive part of the mind and having worked with so many people and seeing how that, especially with food compulsives, because you got to engage in that behavior, right? And now you guys, which if you're gonna have sex or whatever, you gotta deal with it. I just it it blows my mind like how tricky and deceptive the addictive part of the mind can be. Like how, and I can actually understand why we have such an addiction epidemic, because without this education that we provide to be able to deal with the addictive part of the mind effectively, good grief, what hope is anybody going to have? I mean, you've seen how deceptive it gets.
Yeah.
It's just, but I don't want listeners to think, oh my God, yeah, it's so deceptive, and use that as a reason to stay in an addiction. It's like, it's finite. You see the patterns, you learn where it goes. And even if it's deceptive and whatever, that if you're wanting to engage in your compulsive behavior, that there's bullshit in there somewhere, and you have an effective tool to get through. And every time you do that, it gets weaker. You've talked before about you're either going to weaken it, this addictive part of the mind, or you're going to strengthen it. So
Yeah.
I don't want people to feel discouraged because I'm saying I understand why we have an addiction epidemic. But the more you try to run from this thing and or meditate it away or journal it away or deal with your trauma or all of the above, get, treated for anxiety and depression and stress and on and on and on and on, the worse it gets, because I mean, unless you're living under a rock, come on, look around. This is an epidemic that is just spiraling out of control in every way, Um,
Yeah, I
it's
find it
just,
hard
yeah,
personally
yeah.
now, knowing what I know. Like,
I know. I'm
maybe
sorry I
I
dragged you into
know.
this.
No, I'm very, very grateful. I'm very grateful that I learned this
Yeah.
method. But yeah, in terms of like the call last night, for example, at Samaritans, like knowing what I know now and talking to
Yeah.
someone who's there wanting to end their life
Yep.
and not being able to actually tell them the truth because I have certain things I'm allowed to say and things I'm not allowed to say was so painful. It was
Yeah.
horrible.
Or thinking, what if I'd have been able to talk to this person 3 months ago when she decided to stop her
Yeah,
addiction
yeah,
and actually be able to make some changes? I mean, I look around, I mean, I just think of like Matthew Perry and all these people that you see that die from addiction, literally die from addiction. I just would be like, I would love to reach these people. And I think I told you I'm watching all the old Friends episodes. And just since Matthew Perry died and everything, I just got curious. And I mean, what a brilliant, hilarious human being. I mean, he's just and like he said, when he was drinking, he was overweight, and not super overweight, but overweight. And then when he was on the doing the pills, he was skinny. And I look at the episodes and I can totally see the difference now. He said that in his interview he did with Diane Sawyer. And then I was curious, and I see him, like, back and forth like that, and think he's addicted that whole time, and his whole life just like spiraling down, down, down with, $6 million worth of addiction treatment,
Yeah.
and just everything he did. And I just thought, man, I would love to have worked with him, you know, but
Mm.
it's all we can do is what we can do, is try to get it out there, and hopefully people that are struggling with addiction can, connect and maybe get some effective
Yeah.
treatment. So,
Not
yeah.
easy. It's not easy. And, I think being in an addiction is, people don't realize how bad it is until they realize how bad it is. Like, that sounds stupid, but what I mean is, until someone actually sits you down and you write a remember letter, for example, that we talked about in a recent podcast, and you actually really face this reality, you're probably never going to figure it out. Like, you're not going to figure out how much harm this is causing you, because the addictive part of the mind isn't going to want you to acknowledge that actually this is
Yeah.
really impacting your life, and actually you are far from reaching your potential right now, and you have so much more mental clarity and confidence and
Yeah.
freedom to experience, and that is possible.
If anyone out there is participating in any way, whether you're screenwriters or just like marketing, copyright people, copywriters, whatever you call them, stop normalizing addiction. Stop making jokes about it. It's just, it's not funny, and it shouldn't be a subject to be making jokes about. I mean, there's several TV shows that I enjoyed, really good acting, good drama, whatever, that I've literally stopped watching because in one given episode, they're making some kind of a joke about food compulsion. It's always so much with food, but now with everything, with alcohol, with porn, whatever, it's like, or with people being, now it's with people being OCD or ADHD. Now this is the topic of a lot of in a lot of TV dramas. It's like, stop, stop making jokes about this. People are suffering, and it's not funny. And I guess that, when people don't know what else to do, they start making jokes, but it's not funny. So please just
Mm.
stop, stop.
Yeah, I think you can like enjoy and make jokes about some things, but then some things just
Yeah.
aren't funny really. And I think for me, yeah, just knowing that there'll be, obviously most people listening to this are probably just like on a commute to work, or, they're just out and about, and maybe they're cooking or cleaning or something like that. I don't really know. Busy, and they probably just want something in the background just to kind of learn a bit of information and get some support, and maybe hear a relatable story about addiction recovery.
Yeah.
And they're probably wanting to quit porn. And so, we don't want to be too serious on this podcast. But then at the same time, there's like, I don't know, sometimes it just hits me when I actually realize the reality of how much harm
Yeah.
this is hitting people. And I do find it
Yeah.
hard to not take it really seriously. And hopefully we can get this method out there to more people. It's been good so far working with new clients, and I'm going to start doing one-on-ones as well, just as like an introductory. So if you want to learn the fundamentals of this method, then get in touch, because we can set that up.
Yeah, today I'm feeling like this podcast is just a little more somber, but you know, we have fun with it as well. I mean, I listened to our last podcast about the story about the guy shitting his pants in the marathon, and I was just like laughing hysterically. But and that's funny, and we can be light, and but this is a serious topic, and sometimes we just got to get really real with it, which I think we've done today. So
Mm.
I'm yeah,
Yeah, for
yeah.
sure. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening to today's podcast. You can reach out to me at thomasmolyneux.com if you do want any more support, if you have any questions, if there's anything you want answering on the podcast, get in touch and we'll see what we can do. Thank you again for joining me, Mary. Any final words from you?
Always. No, nothing. I think we've said enough today.
All right, cool. Well, you take care, and I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. Goodbye.